Awesome. Hello, everyone. My name is Kim. I am an environmental educator from the Vermont Institute of Natural Science. And just a precursor, if it gets too loud with traffic, let me know, and I'll just pause, move inside so that you all can hear me a little bit better. But since it is so beautiful out, I want to take the opportunity to just enjoy the outdoors. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen, and we will get this going. All right, so can everyone see my beautiful PowerPoint?
Yep, Kim, I can see it.
Fantastic, awesome. So yes, as I'm sure you all know, we're going to be talking about how we're going to create our land so that it can be used by wildlife, and kind of start moving away from manicured lawns. Having just a monoculture of one type of grass isn't really great for your local environment, and just doing a quick change in the kind of plants that are around can do quite a bit in helping provide more food and resources for migratory species, for insects, birds, bats, everything that keeps our ecosystems running. And so I'm just here to offer some information to be somewhat of a guide through the certification process. So as we begin here, if it'll change on me, there we go. A brief introduction to myself. I received or earned my Bachelor of Science degree in animal behavior last May from Carroll University. I'm not a New England native. I am from the Midwest, but I also received minors in the sociology of sustainability. So kind of how people think and how our cultures may impact our desire to be sustainable, or if there's a better way to use culture and push towards sustainability. And I also earned a minor in natural resource management. So looking at how we currently are managing our resources, why things are done the way they are, and possible improvements that may be headed our direction. But for now, since July, I've been working here in Vermont at VINS, the Vermont Institute of Natural Science, and my main roles are providing virtual and in-person programs on ecology of New England, and particularly the roles that are held by birds of prey. Now that is a really exciting topic, but surprisingly enough, for those who aren't familiar with ecology, birds of prey rely on those prey species. And here comes the car, so I'm going to stop. And so we actually talk a lot about conserving mice and rodents, amphibians, reptiles, everything that our birds of prey need, and how interconnected it all is. And a little bit about VINS, the Vermont Institute of Natural Science, is located in Quechee, Vermont, just about 10 minutes from Marsh-Billings. And our mission is to motivate individuals and communities to care for the environment. And we do this through education, research, and wildlife avian rehabilitation. So any type of bird, we are trying to heal and send back into the wild so that they can continue their roles in the ecosystem. And VINS has been a leader in environmental education and wildlife conservation for 49 years. So we're almost at our 50-year mark, and we're nationally known for innovative natural science curricula and education programs for all ages. We have a education team that goes to schools and has this huge curricula, and then we have our environmental education team, which I'm a part of, that does outreaches as well, where we will bring animals to schools and libraries and doing virtuals to connect, especially kids, and of course adults of all ages, to the environment through a really cool personal connection. And so for our topic today, I'm actually not going to be talking about raptors, but really about why it's important to have a haven for wildlife in your backyard. The first one is to combat climate change and habitat loss. Across most species, habitat loss is the #1 contributor to population decreases. That if we can set land aside for wildlife, we do a lot to help species survive and to offset a bunch of issues related to climate change. Forests are really important in helping take in carbon dioxide that we are putting out through consumption. And so by having more of your lawns, having more plants, having more native animals coming through is going to help combat that climate change. And so by replacing high maintenance grass where you have to mow it quite frequently, you may be using some sort of chemical agent to keep it pristine looking. We can switch that with low maintenance native plants. That's going to save you time and money and provide a lot of resources for our wild neighbors. And so that is our migratory and residential species. And really, it's all about learning. And you're then able to recognize the native plants to your area. For this presentation, I am focusing on the Northeast. I know I saw a couple of people were from Florida and Tennessee. So kind of take this information and figure out what are the native plants near you. Luckily, kind of across this latitude up through the Midwest, we have a lot of similar species. And so those who are somewhat in the northern range, you may be able to share some of these common and native species and put them in your own gardens. And so to break it down, there are 5 components when you're creating a wildlife habitat, especially if you want to certify it through the National Wildlife Federation. The first is food, and we're looking for food sources that are available almost year round or at least early spring to late fall. We also want water, cover, shelter, or a place to rear young. And we can have all of those things, but one of the biggest proponents and what ties all of this together is our sustainable techniques. What we're doing and how we're managing the land to best benefit all of the wildlife that are going to be using it, and ultimately how the environment is impacting ourselves. So I'm going to go through each of these parts in a little bit more detail. So the first we're going to start off is with the food. And so when we are looking at food, we want it to be a lot of flowering shrubs. And that's because they provide a lot of different types of food. They provide berries, nuts, twigs, bark. And so this is providing food for birds, mammals, and insects. And so some common ones here would be the common witch hazel, which often has those berries all through the winter, and the American elderberry. Now, I really like elderberry because it has a bunch of immuno benefits for us. And so not just are the birds eating the berries, but you could harvest them and enjoy some of those benefits. And by planting native flowers, you're providing pollen for really important pollinators. Pollinators are seeing huge declines because of herbicides and poisons. And if our pollinators get to such a low number, we're going to start seeing decreases in our crop yields and the food that we can provide for each other. And so it really does come down to providing food for the pollinators to then help us later on. And having these native flowers is going to help our native pollinators. And so one really good example is the woodland sunflower. If you guys have more of a field-like area right on the edge of a forest ecosystem, these guys do wonderful. And so they're spread wide, they're pretty tall, so they're going to cover a lot of land. And super specifically, we want to have a large variety of species. Or supplemental feeders, such as bird feeders in the wintertime or hummingbird feeders for the summer. And having a large variety of species is going to help with food selection. It's going to help migratory species as they come through for early spring and fall. And we're going to promote biodiversity. Part of why I push to move away from our monoculture lawns is because not a lot of animals can use grass. We might see when the grass starts to flower, we'll get a couple of bees or small flies, but not as much as having a huge variety of different native plants. And the best part is you don't really need to touch these plants once they're prosperous. Once they're growing, you can toss out your lawnmower and really just cultivate these plants. And for the certification, you need at least 3 different types of plants or supplemental feeders. Ideally, it would be mostly the native plants and then 1 or 2 feeders, just that we are really providing as much food resource as that plant can create. So the next one is water. And I'm sure you guys know water is essential. And that means that any size of water is water. It's great. And so we can have anything from a simple bird bath to a really elaborate pond. And we really want to try for a flowing system that's going to prevent a lot of algae. And so here are some examples. The top one is actually from the National Wildlife Federation website. And you can see a really nice plaque for that certification next to just a simple water fountain. I think this one might have a bubbler in it that circulates the water, but a standing one is perfectly fine as long as you're cleaning it regularly to avoid the algae. The second image is nice, a different type of fountain where the water is flowing over rocks and circulating back through. Now, this does a wonderful job in reducing the algae because we're adding that air, we're adding that movement. The bottom one is a really nice pond. And if that starts to gain a lot of algae, you really just need to skim the top of it to remove that algae. And this would be a great habitat to have some fish. It'd be great for amphibians to be a part of because they do like that standing water. So your water source kind of just depends on what your current land is like. And if you already have a creek running through, you can add just a simple water in addition to that creek just to provide another source for those wild animals. And if you are seeing that your water is freezing up in the winter, that's okay. A lot of the certifications is just talking about making sure that water is accessible. So in the morning, take out the frozen water in a dish, put another dish out, check it whenever you can, just so that there is some water available. But water in the winter, a lot of animals are built to either hibernate, where they don't really need the water, migrate so that they can find different food sources and water sources, or they're getting water from food. And so in the wintertime, you don't need to stress too much about having frozen water. But if you can put out fresh water, always a great thing to do. And for the certification, you just need one option. When I mentioned about having a natural creek, I would push more for an additional water source just so that you know that it's clean. So the third bit is our cover. So this is all about having a place for animals to go year round. And the certification asks for at least 2 shelters. That way, you can have protection from the elements, such as rain, snow, hail, sleet, and from predators, or for predators. It kind of goes both ways. Some predators need cover in order to then ambush their prey. And in creating a wildlife habitat means you have to provide shelter for all types of animals. So yes, the predators and the prey. And so this can look like a bunch of different things. You can have a live or dead plant matter, like our sweet fern, really, really luscious, tons of space underneath, perfect for our rabbits and small mammals, or even small birds. But you can also just leave a pile of dead branches. Those are fantastic for salamanders, smaller amphibians, snakes, which a lot of people are unsure about snakes, but they do a lot to help control the rodent population near your house. And so snakes are sometimes good to encourage to live on your property. But you can also rely on man-made structures like your birdhouses or a bat house. Bats are in a lot of trouble right now. And one of the best things we can do is to provide a place for them to roost and really help them flourish. And they are such important pollinators and insect protection. And the best thing about this cover is that it's really a place it and leave it mentality. That means once you have planted that sweet fern or you threw a bunch of rocks together or sticks together, you can just leave it and not worry about it again. And so a lot of this certification and creating this habitat is really hands off. It's just setting it up for success and letting it be. So the next step is a place for young. And so this can look like a nest box, or maybe you can build your own. Nest box are wonderful for all types of birds. And it really just depends on the size of nest box that you either purchase or create. A really small one could be home for an eastern screech owl, or if it's put in a meadow, an American kestrel, or maybe some bluebirds. A really large one would be great for larger birds. And sometimes mammals will take their home in those nest boxes as well, and that's perfectly fine. And so we also are promoting for you to have different types of nesting. And so it may not be man-made. It could be that you have coniferous trees, those evergreens, ones that are always keeping their needles, because that provides a place for young no matter the time of year. They don't have to wait for our deciduous trees, our maples, ones that lose their leaves, to re-leaf for those young to have a place to live. Pile of logs and tall grasses are also really great. And yes, cover and a place to raise young could be the same thing. But in order to make sure you're offering a lot of options, the certification asks for at least 2 different places to raise young in addition to the 2 minimum cover locations. So you can say you need 4 places for cover and to raise young together. And so this last bit about the sustainable techniques. The NWF requires 2 out of 3 sustainable practices. And we're going to break them down quite a bit. So here are the 3 practices that NWF recognizes, which is soil and water conservation, control of exotic species, and organic practices. So for soil and water, we're looking at perhaps if you have that creek, to increase the number of plants that are on the bank. And that's called riparian zone, riparian buffer, riparian vegetation. Increasing that is huge in helping our water quality. Those plants filter a lot of toxins. They provide cover for turtles and different types of fishes might go around the roots if it's a rooted plant in the water. And it's really, really important in just keeping the gunk out. But you can also have a way to collect roof rainwater and then use that rainwater to irrigate your garden. Using a drip or a soaker hose is a lot better in conserving your water use. When we just kind of spray a hose over everything, we aren't really getting to the roots of the plants, but having a hose that has a bunch of holes stuck to it, and then you place that hose kind of under the dirt a little bit or right on top, that water goes right into the soil, gets right to the roots of the plants, and it's going to reduce your water use by quite a lot. Having mulch is really important because it gives kind of more of a structure to the plants and keeps the soil there. Runoff and soil leaving the area can be pretty difficult to keep together. And my favorite type of soil and water conservation is called rain gardens. So that's what that first picture is. It's a garden that functions to really help the water permeate down. And a lot of times when it rains, the water just kind of sticks on top of the grass. And since so many people here in Vermont and throughout the United States use well water, we want as much rain as possible to filter down and recharge that reservoir. Watershed depletion is a huge issue, and we really want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to help that rain get down deep into that underground reservoir. So rain gardens function really well as a way to just provide an easy route down. There's a lot of different layers to them. It's actually pretty inexpensive to begin. A lot of times it's about having different layers of rocks, different types of soils, different types of plants. But again, if where you're living isn't really prone to having rain, or maybe your landscape isn't going to be the most beneficial, then you should do whatever is going to be the most useful. So going on to the next bit about the exotic species. Pest, invasive species are a huge issue throughout the country. And so one of the biggest ways to handle this is called integrated pest management. This is a pretty active, inactive type of management plan, and it's very cyclical. It just keeps going in a circle. And so that's what this first graphic is. It's looking at, you can start at any part. Maybe you're monitoring some type of invasive species. You have to kind of know how many are there on your property. And then you go through a treatment plan. A lot of times, just treating that plant by cutting it down or maybe applying a gentle herbicide to it isn't enough. And then you have to go through monitoring how effective was your treatments, figuring out ways to prevent it. One of my favorite ways that's involved with IPM is using goats and having goats go through and graze a specific area, eating a lot of those invasives. And using different techniques and looking at the effect of them and adjusting with each season, you can do a lot to help mitigate the expansiveness of those invasives. Another control tactic you can do is reducing the lawn space. Again, just making sure the more native plants you can get into the ground and get going, the less space there's going to be for those invasives. And the last one is organic practices, and I'm sure a lot of you are already doing this one. Composting, especially with the recent food landfill ban, people are really pushing for composting. Super easy to do if you're happen to live in an apartment. I love creating Verma Composts, which are using worms in a bin to break down the food for you. So you don't need to have a huge expanse of land to have a large pile like the one that's pictured. But also just simply eliminating the amount of chemicals you're using. Those pesticides, herbicides, even fertilizers can affect the environment quite strongly. And so by kind of reducing our use of chemicals, we're not just helping the land and the soil, but a lot of times chemicals move through food chains. And that's something we talk a lot about at Vince, because when we are looking at our owl populations or our other raptor populations, we are seeing poison cases coming through where an owl eats a poisoned mouse and gains that toxin themselves, and that toxin is still active. So by reducing your chemical use all around, you're not just helping the soil directly, but you're also helping the different individuals that are part of your ecosystem. So now what? I've given you all of this information. We talked about the 5 different areas. So now it's just about figuring out where your wildlife habitat could go and what it might look like. So here's just a brief example. This was from a website called Earth Easy. And looking at this, we're seeing a really nice size of property. But we're also seeing parts of every single bit that we talked about. So to begin with food, this location has hummingbird feeders. I think there's one more car. I think we're good. All right, so we have our hummingbird feeders, which is our supplemental feeding. But we also have native plants. We have fruit trees, hedges, I'm sure, providing. Trees in general are also providing food. So that checks that off right at the list. For the second one is the water. They ask for one water source, but this one happened to have 2. So we have a pond here, and perhaps this pond is a little bit too still standing, so there's a lot of algae to it. So this home decided to implement a simple bird bath. It's really great when you can spread things out, just provides more opportunities for individuals to take advantage of that resource. The next step was the cover. And this really is everything on this example. So we have our hedges, which are usually really dense, perfect for small songbirds. Fruit trees and deciduous trees also provide great cover for the spring, summer, and fall months. But we, of course, have our conifers, our evergreens in the back here that are going to have cover year round, and our log pile, something that is our leave it mentality, where we're not going to be touching this log pile, and it's just going to sit there season after season, gaining more and more volume just by having leaf litter coming down from the deciduous trees. Maybe the grasses are going to get trampled a little bit, grow, expand. And so this is going to get bigger over time, which is awesome. The last one was the place to rear young. So this example specifically has a birdhouse and a tree. Um, a bat house would probably be more of our cover, but that means that we could count our conifers as a place to raise young. Tall grasses are also a really great place for our small mammals. The pond could be great for our amphibians to raise young. And of course, we're not seeing the sustainable techniques that are being used on this property, but I would assume that they aren't using any chemicals. They likely would have compost in their yard, even though this picture doesn't include it. Ways that they are implementing two of those three options. So, a really good way to figure out what's best for your plan is to create a blueprint to say, this is where my house is, this is my property line, this is what's already there. Now, what can I add to it that's going to make one specific area a really great habitat? You could try your entire property, but that can also just be a lot to handle. So, start with just one location. And then once you kind of get the hang of it, you can just begin to expand it. And so here at VINS, our sustainability and land management has always been a part of our organization. And that's because we were founded after spearheading the state's first water litigation. That was back in 1970, and the Ottaquechee River was heavily polluted, and the founders of VINS pushed for new law reforms to stop the pollution and to clean up the river. So our ideas of land management have been around for since our beginning. And our property currently includes 47 acres with forest, meadow, and aquatic ecosystems, where we have this beautiful river, but we also have a vernal pond that comes up. So that's a pond that forms every spring, disappears by the end of the summer and the fall, and then comes back. And vernal ponds are extremely important for amphibians. And so, even though we don't have a specific location that is certified, we are working specifically in our meadow, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But we do see all of these places, the food, water, cover, places to raise the young are all seen on our campus. And I wanted to include this just to show you that if you can identify these four aspects on your own property, it's going to help you figure out what's best to do when you want to certify. And so for our food and water, we have a gorgeous meadow that offers a wide array of plants. And we also have a large water source. So right here, this is our property. We have our Ottaquechee River runs here. The dam is over on the right side. And then this is Dewey's Pond. Pretty well known in this area. And so it's really great because we'll see cranes be over on Dewey's Ponds, then fly over to Ottaquechee River and then hang out in, there's kind of an ecotone right in between where our land is and the water itself. So it's really fun seeing wildlife move and to recognize that wildlife don't know our boundaries. They don't understand property lines. And so by creating an environment that is beneficial to them, you're just helping them along the way. We also have a lot of ecological niches or niche, however you prefer to say it, and we actively have nest boxes. So having a large forest allows different areas. We have animals that prefer to be high up in the canopy, ones that prefer to be at the ground, and everywhere in between. We also make sure to leave dead plant matter. If you walk our trails right now, we had to cut down a lot of trees after that large windstorm blew a lot over. And we left them exactly where they landed as long as it was in a safe place. If it wasn't in a safe place, we just shifted them over just a little bit. And that's because we recognize how important forest floor litter is. Leaf litter is extremely important for any animals going into hibernation, getting that cover, eating the leaf litter. Fallen trees also offer a huge source of food and cover. So salamanders will get in between a rotted log, and black bears will tear apart rotted logs looking for different types of insects to eat. So it really has a huge impact in the resources that wildlife needs. And so if you can leave a dead tree somewhere on your property where it already fell, that's fantastic. And as for a nest box, these are some eastern bluebirds. Ideally, our nest boxes would have been used by the American kestrel. American kestrels are decreasing a lot in number, but sometimes our eastern bluebirds take roots instead, and that's all right. Nest boxes are really fun because you can watch a family grow, and really little effort is put in on your part. Other than installing it, after the fall, you should remove any of the nesting material because that will increase the birds to come back or a new family to move in if there's not any leftover gunk from the previous summer. And that's all you have to do. Really great at providing that resource, especially if you had a tree that fell down, then you could put up a nest box in replacement, and to provide even more opportunities for places to rear young, to be covered from the elements, to avoid predation, all those important things. So at VINS, we are working to do more, and that comes down to our meadow. So monarch butterflies are heavily and quickly decreasing. I believe Monarch Watch is the kind of overseeing organization on monarchs. There's the ones, they tag monarch butterflies, they encourage others to take part where you capture butterflies, put a little sticker on their wing, write it down, and release so that we can see the migration tracks, see if we're losing a number. And I wasn't able to catch the exact number that has decreased in the last year, but I do remember it was substantial. That's likely due to habitat loss, pesticides, and just overall climate change. And so we're trying to create a certified monarch habitat. And we're doing this through the Monarch Way Station, and Monarch Watch. And so this includes that maintaining a meadow in sustainable practices, but also we need to be able to count the number of milkweed and nectar plants per square yard. Also to ensure that there are multiple species of milkweeds. That's something I learned. I thought there's just the one that I saw all the time in the plains of the Midwest, but there are a ton, and a lot of different species rely on different milkweeds. And so creating the Monarch Way Station, monarchs may prefer one milkweed over the other, but it's also about creating a high biodiversity in this area so that we are helping the monarchs, but also any other butterfly population that's coming through. We also need to make sure that we know the annuals, which are plants that have a growing season of 1 year, the biennials, plants that grow over 2 years, and the perennials, which are about a 3-year or more growing season. And that we have a high diversity of those as well. That's really important because it's going to keep our meadow healthy. It's going to keep that there is a food source year after year, and that we'll know if we have a lot of annuals 1 year, we need to make sure that we're seeing those perennials and those biennials returning, and just to make sure we're constantly monitoring with each year. And so we are currently working on this, and making sure that this will be a certification that we're going to be getting pretty soon. And so talking about those perennials and pollinators and how important our bees and our butterflies and our moths and everything is to making sure that things are healthy. Perennials are one of the most important ones. They're the ones that take a couple of years to go through a growing season so that you know you're going to have a food source for multiple years. And so having a high diversity of plants promotes a high diversity of pollinators. I mean, kind of think about it, in the wintertime, you have a bird feeder out. If you just put one type of seed, you'll usually only see a couple of species of birds. But if you then put out different types of seeds, maybe some suet, you're going to start seeing not only the chickadees, not only the redpolls, but you're also going to be seeing the woodpeckers. You're going to be seeing a ton of different birds. I'm now just learning my songbirds, so I can't give you more examples. But you're going to see more and more species because you're offering different types of food. So you can think of what you see with your bird feeders and apply it to the types of plants that are going to be in your area. And spring ephemerals are the plants that are the ones growing right now. They take advantage of all of the sunlight and they grow quickly and they stop right as the trees leaf out. Now, those spring ephemerals are super important to the pollinators. These are going to start becoming out of hibernation right now. Different types of insects are going to leave their different stages and need different types of foods. And those spring ephemerals are extremely important to the survival of those individuals during really hard food times. And so the native willows that this little bee is on right now provide the most pollen in the first months of spring. So some ideas to start kind of thinking about as you begin to figure out what you should plant in preparation for next spring. But it's also important to note that if you buy plants from big box stores like Home Depot, a lot of times plants are being selected for their aesthetic, the look that we like. And a couple of studies have shown that those type of plants that have been selective for what we want actually aren't very helpful to pollinators. They're losing some kind of quality that the bees aren't preferring. And so it's kind of hard to figure out what to do next. And so my opinion is to figure out who are the vendors at those big box stores and then reach out to local Audubon societies, local botanist, and figure out, what vendor can I get that is providing high quality, really, really natural seeds, and just kind of figure it out as you go along. And so just some examples, flowers that are going to be growing kind of in our spring month are the golden alexanders. And these are providing food for bees, swallowtail caterpillars, and they grow pretty tall and cover up a lot of land. In our late June and our really nice summer months, we have our lance leaf coreopsis. And these guys provide a lot of food for butterflies, beetles, and birds like finches. Your lavender hyssop is a really common garden plant and is a huge provider for pollen for those bees, beetles, butterflies, moths, and even hummingbirds. Now, the closed gentian is really interesting. It is a low woodland plant and primarily is only being pollinated by bumblebees. And so these guys are really important because they're a spring ephemeral. They are providing a lot of pollen in the these guys are late August. I was mixing them up. But these guys are really important in late August as other plants are starting to end their growing season. These guys are pretty much just beginning. They're going to provide the last bit of pollen those bees need before they go into their dormant area. In September is when we see our beautiful New England aster, that wonderful purple or yellow flower, and they provide a lot of food for bees, butterflies, beetles, and moths. So huge variety there and a great plant to include in your environment. So right now, here are our ephemerals, our yellow trout lily, Virginia bluebells, and Dutchman's breeches. All low-growing plants coming up right now as we get warmer to gain that sunlight. The trout lily is specifically pollinated by bees and food source for beetles. And there is one specific type of miner bee called the yellow trout lily bee because that miner bee is the primary pollinator for the yellow trout. So we always talk about save the bees, and that is a really great plant to start to include. The Virginia bluebell is excellent for butterflies, and especially with that shape of kind of being downward, butterflies are pretty much the only ones that can pollinate it. Some bees will try to hover and get the pollen with that structure of the flower. So if you want to encourage more butterflies, that is an excellent plant to have for your early spring. And Dutchman breeches, again, are those bumblebees and the honeybees, but they also have a seed that ants really use quite a bit. So we're not just caring about our pollinators, but also the little guys and having food source for all of our ecosystem. And so here's just a brief information about that certification. you would go to www.nwf.org/certify. And it's a really simple process. It is essentially just a checklist. There is a $20 application fee, and that goes directly to land conservation. And like I said, you just check off that you have the elements. And other than creating a really great habitat, they of course have some other incentives for you, such as a personalized certificate, 1-year membership to their magazine, 10% off National Wildlife Federation items. The sign you would get is this one pictured. And then you could use that 10% off to get a really fancy sign that's like metal and very pretty. And of course, a subscription to a monthly Garden for Wildlife e-newsletter. I'm registered for that, and that's where I got a lot of my information about the plants for the early spring. And if you were to go and buy seeds right now, you could absolutely plant those ephemerals right this month, and they'll be able to bloom in time to help your early pollinators. And that is all I have. Here is just a contact page. Feel free to email me. I'm kholland@vinsweb.org. If you want to come visit Vins, we're open from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. every day. But we're going to be switching soon, where we are open until 5 p.m. And I believe that is in April. But check our website at vinsweb.org for more information. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen a little bit, and we can start our Q&A.
Great. Thank you so much, Kim. That was an awesome presentation. I'm thinking of the ways we can get our apartment to get certified now. So I am just going to go through the chat and try to find our first question. So the first question was for you, Kim. Will the presentation slides be available after the session?
I absolutely can send them along. Yep.
Great. And I will also, this session is recorded, and I will be sending an email once the recording is posted to our YouTube to everyone who registered. So as long as you received an email with this link, you will receive an email with the link to the recording. So the next question is, how about naturally occurring seasonal streams?
Oh, yeah, those are really great. And I would pretty much figure out where they are on your property, and see what can you do to incorporate more of those items around that stream. So if you know that each spring you get this stream and it runs north to south, you can then say, okay, my certified habitat area is going to be, sorry, I want to make sure you guys can hear me. It's going to be about this section of the stream. I'm going to make sure that I'm planting a bunch of tall grasses on the banks, different types of plants throughout, putting up some nesting boxes right along the stream, adding some maybe additional logs to create cover inside the stream if it gets pretty deep at times. So definitely is a really cool bit of your property that you could easily incorporate into your certified habitat.
Yeah, one thing we do at the national park, we actually recently had a big Norway spruce that blew down and fell into our pond at the park called the Pogue. So we removed the section of the tree that was on the trail, but we left the portion that had fallen into the pond as a way to help provide wildlife habitat, trying to mimic the natural order of things. So the next question is, we got our backyard certified probably 20 years ago. Is there any difference now, and do they still send you a plaque?
That's an awesome question. And I don't know. I definitely would reach out to National Wildlife Federation and see if you need to reapply. They might waive the fee if they need you to because you did do it quite a while ago. Or it could be like a suggested donation at that point. Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm not really have an answer for you. Reach out to the organization and they definitely will be able to answer that.
So the next question, Kim, is, are ticks more common in this kind of landscape than in a mowed lawn?
Ooh, that's an awesome question. I would say ecologically, Yes, because they do kind of like the more tall grasses, bushy area. Um, and so it would be something to think about. And then if that is a worry for you, say you have a dog that runs free, maybe you don't want that dog to get a tick, or you have kids, then just make a specific portion of your yard into that and then have some lawn space. Definitely ticks and Lyme disease is really prevalent here in the Northeast, but I also know a lot of people have had a lot of ticks attached to them and not actually bite. If you check your ankles, you check your sock lines to make sure that when you come back inside, you don't have any ticks on. Um, but there was some studies done in Connecticut about Lyme disease and the prevalence of mice, and that if you can have more of a natural landscape that promotes the natural predators of the mice, you actually reduce the number of Lyme cases in that area. So it's pretty complicated, but is a completely understandable concern. And so I think if you're just smart about where you're positioning your habitats, and just being a little bit more careful about checking for ticks, it would be a reasonable thing to do still.
Great. So the next question is, we live around a quarter mile from a river, not on it. Does that count as a water source?
Mm. I would say no, that they want the water source to be specifically in the habitat that you're creating. Um, and that's also why I referenced earlier about if you have a naturally occurring creek, stream, that you might want to have an additional water source just so that you can check that off for sure. Um, and also, it's great that there is a river nearby, but also be really great to have your habitat close to your home so you can watch things from inside throughout all the seasons.
So the next question, it looks like it was kind of worked out in the chat, but we'll ask you, Kim, maybe you have some thoughts. The question is, bears won't bother a hummingbird feeder. We aren't allowed to have bird feeders out except in the dead of winter.
Yes. All right. So bears are actually my love. I've worked with black bears before, and they're pretty neat. They're really smart. And it also is important to recognize that we are in bear country. So when we're looking at supplemental feeders, I have seen some reports of bears using their cool tongue to get into bird feeders, but it's also important to recognize that bears, if it's a really good food year out in the woods, they have a lot of food, they're less likely to encroach on human territory. That we actually see more bear activity when we're in a drought, when there aren't a lot of plants that they can eat out in the woods. That being said, we should recognize that a lot of times we can't have bird feeders out in the summer because some bears are going to be the outliers and just come onto human property no matter what is out in the forest. Um, and so that's kind of when we just make sure that we have some more of those naturally occurring food sources, that we have some sort of berrying, flowering plants to provide that food that can be separated from a bird feeder for the summer.
Great. So the next question, Kim, is it okay to paint a birdhouse?
If you are using non-toxic paints, totally fine. Most birds really don't care what it looks like as long as they're able to get into the hole fine. They feel like it's a protected space from predators. And sometimes, if you line the bottom with some pine needles or some wood shavings, that actually will promote birds to go into those nests as well.
Just a follow-up question, Kim, that I have on that. Are there any preferred colors that may come into play with that?
I don't have an answer for that. That's really interesting. Birds definitely see more colors than we do. So it may actually be more of what colors are neutral for the bird. Like, are there any colors that might be a deterrent to the birds because they do see in ultraviolet? But definitely, I'm sure there's some research done on that. It's just I just don't have it in my own mind.
Sure.
Yeah, that's a cool one.
Um, the next question, well, actually, a comment that I put in, just I wanted to field out. If any of you are interested in conserving monarchs on your property, there's an invasive plant called black swallowwort that's really important to keep an eye on because it's part of the milkweed family. However, because it's non-native, it's actually toxic to monarch larvae. So they'll mistakenly lay their eggs on the black swallowwort, thinking it's in the milkweed family. So when the larvae go to feed on the plant, it's toxic to them and then they die. So if you're interested in conserving monarchs, that's a really important species to be on the lookout for. Um, so the next question, Kim, is what types of milkweed seeds do you recommend planting to support monarchs?
Mm. The first one that comes to mind is the common milkweed. Um, and that's the only one I know off the top of my head. Really, the all the milkweeds look relatively the same. They just offer some sort of quality that is preferred by monarchs and by certain species of other butterflies. And just by having a wide variety, so say you're going to get like 5 packets of the common milkweed, then say you're going to get like 3 or 4 of different ones, just so you have a high rate of biodiversity amongst the milkweed plants. And again, just to make sure that you're not going to accidentally be planting a non native milkweed to your area. So that's just where your extra bit of research comes in. A lot of the research I did for this presentation, I relied on a lot of Audubon Society and arborist websites that are really good at recognizing like this is where this plant is native from, this is where it should be planted, these are the zones of your current of what your current land is on. There's a bunch of different zonings of just saying this is the habitat, this is what will flourish there, and then using that information to create a successful habitat.
Yeah, just to go off of that, I think a good step is always to just make sure it's a native plant to your area and that it is going to grow in your unique plant hardiness zone, which are designated by the United States Department of Agriculture, and that's available online. Um, so the next question, it looks like this also, there was a little couple comments about it in the chat, but I'll just ask you, Kim. Just moved to the Upper Valley from Maryland. I had good luck with butterfly bushes out there. Do they grow here?
Hmm.
I'm unfamiliar with butterfly bush as a plant.
Yeah, I know butterfly bushes from in the Midwest where they are pretty common and native. Um, I'm not sure about this specific region and them. Definitely a really good thing to look into. Like if you're familiar with a specific plant, to just put in butterfly plant Vermont and see if it comes up. Usually there'll be a first article will say invasive, or the first article will say great native plants, and then that pretty much gives you the go ahead. Yeah, luckily, like when it comes to all of these things, all these different plants, there is so much information available for free online. That just takes a couple of Google searches to see what is available to you and what your current knowledge can provide. Yeah.
Yeah, it looks. The next comment says that butterfly bush does not live through the winter at our house, which is zone 4. And if Sharon, you're from New Hampshire or Vermont, then that likely applies to anyone else in the area. Um, so the next question is at Gardener Supply, I saw these bee house things that are a bunch of hollow bamboo pieces. Do they work to give bees a home or is it a human aesthetic, nice idea kind of thing?
Ooh, ooh, that's a good question. I don't know anything about those. I'll have to do some research. Um, but that is actually a really good note about is this actually helping or is this just making me feel good because I think it's helping? Um, so I think it really comes down to is there a specific species that ad is promoting? Are they just saying general bee? I find that things that are just general, like we support all wildlife is great, but it might not actually be helpful. But if it says this specifically helps birds or this specifically helps the trout lily bee, then I think if it has a specific species or more specific information that it's likely to actually be doing that good. And also kind of depends on your area. A lot of times bees may actually be minor bees and they're not going to be using that type of housing because they build underground. Or maybe it's for carpenter bees. And maybe that might help promote them to instead of burrowing into your porch, they're going to go into this house. Um, but I haven't heard about those before, so I'll have to do some research in that.
Great. So it looks like there's a couple comments, some interesting ones. Any kind of chickens eat ticks. They have made a huge difference on our property. Um,
Yep.
it's
Oh, and
good.
I did see a comment earlier about the ticks and that by promoting the predators, you do reduce the ticks quite a lot. So animals like opossums eat so many ticks. And if there's a way that you can promote opossums, they like kind of our wooded areas and they're familiar in suburbs just because they do really, really well in eating our trash because they eat carrion, they eat leftover fruits, and they also eat a lot of ticks. But also, possums don't carry rabies. So it's kind of a win win for us if we can get more opossums in our area. Yeah, so it's really looking at the big picture and saying, well, I have chickens. Chickens are going to reduce the number of ticks in my area. That means I can have more natural environments. So even if there are more ticks, I've got the chickens to help mitigate that.
It's a great point. So the next question is, what native plants would be best for holding soil in place on a steep slope?
That's an awesome question. Because yeah, slopes are a little difficult. Not a lot of plants can survive the slopes because they need soil, and if the soil erodes away with the slope, you got an issue. Um, there are a couple that do really well. I'm trying to remember what the name was. Oh, the Staghorn Sumac is really really great. They um, if it's a female plant, they have those really nice conical bundles of fruit that make a really delicious tea if you were to take them off and make them and steep them. Very delicious. But they do really well right here in this area on slopes. Um, and so sometimes if you can't find a plant to survive the slope, sometimes it's just about creating a way that's going to stick the soil on there. So that's when we kind of just start to add rocks. We just start to add things that are going to keep that slope there because we don't want that slope to get steeper and steeper and steeper with erosion. And I'm not an expert on that side of things by any means, but there are certainly experts out there talking to a local university to professors. They're going to have tools for you or maybe names that you can then connect with um, or ways that maybe the professor is looking for something for their lab students to do. And it could just be, let's figure out a way to help this person help their land. So definitely reach out to as many people as you can to kind of work through that.
That's just good general advice too. So the next question or comment is, I have no scientific data to back this up, but it seems like blue shirts tend to attract more bugs when out doing field work. So maybe a blue paint could be beneficial for birds in that aspect. Just a thought.
That
That's
is possible,
that's
but
unfortunate for me to hear because my uniform is blue. So
good luck, Joe. I would only say that a lot of issues with nests is too many insects. A lot of young nestlings may start get bitten by flies, and this goes from songbirds up to eagles. And if there are too many insects, that can actually cause a lot of issues. There's been reports of birds jumping from nests because like the black flies are so bad or the gnats are so bad. Um, and so I would actually be a little bit hesitant of putting paint that might increase bugs. But it could actually help if you put something else that's painted 10 feet away that might increase bugs over there. And then the birds can go pick those bugs and go back to their house that isn't blue if that's going to promote the bugs. And on a separate note, I see someone added a wonderful article from ecosystemgardening.com saying butterfly bush is invasive, don't plant. So ignore what I said, don't plant a butterfly bush. Try to figure out if there are other plants that promote those butterflies. So kind of like that Virginia bluebell had a really specific shape to them that really is only helpful to the butterflies in getting that pollen. So think about the natural history of bugs. Butterflies are super lightweight. They have really sticky feet, so they can pretty much stick onto anything. So they actually do really well with those plants that are more specialized towards them.
great. So it Doesn't look like we have any more questions. If anyone has questions that I didn't get to that I missed, please put them in now. Oh, we got, could you please name the sumac again? I missed it.
Yep. It was the staghorn.
I'll put it in the chat.
Yep. So Staghorn Sumac. It's not the poison sumac. They look completely different. The staghorn kind of has a really short trunk, like maybe 10 inches max, not even 8, 5. I'm horrible at measurements, but it has one really short trunk and then a bunch of arms that come off of it. They then have these really pretty broad leaves. And they kind of look like feathers because they're kind of individual. They turn really bright oranges, reds in the fall, really, really beautiful coloring. And like I said before, the female plants are very characteristic with a conical shape of seeds that stay there all winter long. And so they feed, I think one article I was researching about them said that they feed like almost 300 different birds, depending on where you're located. And so they are really, really beneficial throughout the all types of ecosystems. They do really well and also do great on slopes.
Okay, so the next question that just came up is groundhog resistant plant suggestions.
That's a good one. And I don't have an answer. I'm sorry. Groundhogs are, I mean, they're kind of notorious, right? But they also are actually pretty important to our ecosystem. The tunnels and dens that they make are really helpful in creating habitat for other animals down the line. So even though groundhogs, groundhogs, woodchucks might be eating things you don't want them to, they actually do provide a lot of help to the overall ecosystem. So that just kind of comes down to how important is the plant that you're trying to save from a groundhog? And if it is really important, is there a way that you could maybe create a different environment? Maybe move it to a place where you know the groundhogs aren't going to be. Or if you make more of a habitat that actually promotes groundhogs, they may just move over there and not touch whatever plant you don't want them to.
Great suggestion.
But also dogs are great. So just have your dog walk around.
There's a comment made about, I got a dog, no more groundhogs. So it doesn't look like we have any more questions. But again, if anyone has any, please put them in the chat now. So thank you all for joining us today. Kim, wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. I just wanted to take a moment to draw your attention to our upcoming workshops. We have 2 more virtual workshops left in our series. So next Monday, we'll have the last installment of our wildlife tracking series. This one will be focusing on the rodents. And then after that, our last virtual workshop will be on April 8th from 12 to 1, same time. And that's going to be a workshop on how you can get started composting. So I hope to see you guys again.
Because composting was one of the sustainable practices you can do for your certification.
Yeah, I threw that in the chat when I saw that. I was like,
awesome.
Come to our composting.
And if I could do just a little plug, I know you had a workshop about bats a couple weeks ago. If that was interesting to you guys or you want to learn about bats, VINS is hosting a virtual panel regarding bats and connecting it with COVID-19 and the pandemic. So that is hosted on Thursday, April 1st, I believe at 5:30. You can find more information on the VINS website or on Facebook. It's a free event, and we have a couple of really cool bat experts talking just about bats in general and the interconnected between humans, bats, and how the pandemic is playing a role in this.
Thanks for bringing that up. I'll send an email to the people that came to the bat workshop in case they're interested.
Great, and I'll send you the information.
Sounds good. Great partnership. Okay, so Kim and I will stay on just a little bit longer if anyone has any lingering thoughts, but for everyone else, thank you so much for joining us today. And like I said, you'll get an email about the recording when it's posted. So thank you all so much, and I hope you enjoy this warm weather. What a treat it is. Check out those spring ephemerals while you're at it.
Very well.
Bye-bye. Thank you. All right. Thanks, Kim. I'm going to end the meeting now for
Awesome.
all. Oh, we just got a quick
Oh, yes. Ooh,
idea.
yes.
Yeah, you can see it.
Okay. So for best bat house locations, bats really prefer to have their house on a post in the middle of a field. And if that post has a predator guard, so you have the pole and then a thing that fans down, it prevents things from climbing up it. That's really important. You could also put a bat house if you have bats often in your attic. You know, you should close up whatever hole they're using. But if you know where the hole is and you close it up, you could actually install a bat house to the side next to where that hole was. So that the bats that were using your attic, if they come back, they now have a place to be that's a little bit safer. They also, if you put one upright against the chimney on that brick, also a really good location. And it's promoted that bat houses should be dark in color because it actually grabs heat from the sun and keeps it warm overnight. So that's really important for the bat's overall health because at nighttime, if it gets too cold, things can get a little complicated for them. So yeah.
Great. All right. Unless there are any more questions, I am going to end the meeting for all. So thank you, everyone.